All right, so this week's topic comes from an email I got just the other day on somebody asking me how to create rain in Photoshop. Now, of course, there's a lot of tutorials out there on creating rain, but what they're asking is not only how to create the rain, but to animate it, to give it life and movement. So that's what we're going to do here. I was kind of toying around with it and actually came up with a pretty cool solution, so let's do it. Here I have a simple picture of a house. Now, the first thing I need to do is set up the lighting. Obviously, when it's raining, it's not as bright and colorful as it appears to be here. So we need to make this image a little bit more gloomy as when it would raining, you would expect it to be. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press Command or Control U to bring up the hue saturation, and let's just take the saturation of this down to about -40. I think that looks good. And we're going to darken it up with some levels. I'm going to press Command or Control L. And I'm not going to use these inputs levels, but the output levels down here. I'm just going to take this white slider and just push it in a little bit. You can see it starts to give it an overall darkness to it, giving it a really gloomy feel. So that looks pretty good, and click OK. Now, let's go ahead and create the rain. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer, and I'm going to press Shift-Delete to bring up the fill dialog, and let's go ahead and fill that with 50% gray. That all looks good. Now, I'm going to go under the filter menu and go to noise, add noise, and we're going to use the amount of 400, Gaussian, monochromatic, everything looks good, and we'll click OK. But now, at this point, some people would probably go to filter and use motion blur for the next step. What I'm going to do is actually I'm going to rotate this image. Let's go into the image menu, go down here to rotate canvas, 90 degrees. And I'm going to go into the filter menu. I am going to go to blur, but I'm just going to select this second item, blur. It just gives it a very slight, like a 1 or 2 pixel blur there. Then we're going to go into the filter menu down here to stylize, and we're going to choose wind. You have 3 choices here. You can use wind, blast, or stagger. In this case, we're going to use blast. As you can see, it's giving me an interesting effect there. And click OK. I'm going to press Command or Control F to reapply that filter. Now, the dark areas, all these little speckled black areas, are actually what I want to be my rain, and what's white I actually want to be the background. So I'm just going to simply invert the values of this by pressing Command or Control I. So now let's zoom out a little bit here, and let's re-rotate our image back to its original position. Now the reason I rotated it is because of that wind filter, is it only goes from left to right. So I had to turn my image in order to be able to apply it. So rotate canvas, counterclockwise. Now it looks like the way I did my rain here, it actually looks like it's falling up. So I'm actually going to just rotate that layer. So I'm going to press Command or Control T and hold down my Shift key. And you can see I get the little bent arrow here. I'm just going to rotate this around like that. Okay. So there we have that. Well, now what I want to do is I want to define this rain as a pattern. But now I'm going to have to make some adjustments here so it looks like a continuous pattern. So I'm going to go down here to Filter, Other, Offset. And if I just move these sliders, you can see it offsets the image, and that's, if I create a pattern now, I'm going to get this seam all the way through my pattern. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to use my clone stamp tool just to sample an area down here. I'm going to Option or Alt click just inside the area down in here and just paint in that area so it matches the whole pattern there. So now let's go into the Edit menu, go to Define Pattern, and give it a name, call it Rain. So now I don't necessarily need this layer anymore. I'm not going to throw it away, I'm just going to turn it off just in case I got to go back and make an adjustment here and there. Let's create a new blank layer. And I'm going to fill this with a color. I'm just going to use a 50% gray as a nice base because the fill color of the layer is completely inconsequential because we're going to make it invisible because we're going to animate this as a layer style. So let's go under the window menu and pull up our animation timeline. There we are. So let's go ahead and go into the layer styles of this layer. Make sure your playhead is at the very beginning of your timeline. I'm going to double click the layer icon, and inside our layers dialog here, we're going to choose Pattern Overlay. And I'm going to go inside the pattern menu here, and it should be the very last thing selected, which is the rain. There it is. Now, as you can see, it's filled it in there, but that gray is still on the layer. So what we need to do is go up here into our blending options, and we're going to drop the fill opacity, not the opacity of the layer, as you can see right here, but the fill opacity. And what that does is it makes everything in the layer invisible except the layer styles. So we can only see the layer style, which in this case is that rain pattern. Well, now I need to go back down here. Well, actually, let's go ahead and click OK and come back out into our timeline. So we've set up that style. Let's twirl down the properties of this layer and go ahead and drop in a keyframe for the style. And I'm just going to move this down to the end of my timeline, which is set to 10 seconds. And let's go back inside that layer style dialog. Let's double click that and highlight pattern overlay. And here's where it gets interesting. If I move my dialog out of the way, go inside my image and just hold my shift key down and just drag down. And I'm just clicking and dragging, and it, how much of the rain you want to fall, just keep dragging it. I'm just going to drag it a little ways here. And that looks good. And then one last thing I'm going to do here is simply change the blend mode to screen. And there you can see the rain's blending into the image. If you want it a little less harsh, you can certainly choose maybe lighten or perhaps soft light to give it a little bit more darker feel. I'm going to go ahead and stick with screen. Now the problem is, as you can see, it drops in a new keyframe down here, but if I go back to this keyframe, it's gone back to black. And that's because we did not change the blend mode on this keyframe. So let's go back in here, change the blend mode to screen, and now it should consistently run patternless right through there. See, it's kind of a seamless pattern, animating right through there, giving me an interesting rain effect. And the beauty is it's all done as a layer style. So it's not one big size layer we're animating through the viewable area, which makes it, animate a little bit quicker. Now, if you did not want the rain going straight up and down, you could certainly tilt it, but you're going to have to convert this into a smart object. So I'm going to control or right click directly on this layer and go right here to convert to smart object. Now when it does that, it's going to default back to its original fill. It's simply a matter of changing the layer's blend mode back to screen. Now if you zoom out and press Command or Control T to free transform, you can now rotate the rain and scale it up. That way it kind of looks like it's coming in from the side. Go back in here, let's zoom in. And it renders the frames as it goes through. So we don't need to go through the full 10, let's just render about 3 seconds of it. It'll just play through, and once it renders through and gets to the end there we have pretty realistic rain all done right there inside Photoshop.